be seated. Friends, we're gathered here today to pay our affectionate respects, to pay farewell, to begin accompanying in this final journey to Eretz Yisrael a truly admired, beloved individual, not only family member, but a member of so many shuls, Shlomo Manis ben Rav Moshe, the Yocheved, our dear Solomon Sol Max. Sol was born in 1935, would have been 83 at his next birthday. Beloved wife, life partner, Meira, married 53 years. His children, David and Tina, and their children, Rebecca, Rachel, Shira, and Mo, and Daniel and Lisa, and their children, Rina, Ilana, and Ari. Before we hear words of Divrei Preda, eulogy, I'm going to invite some of the distinguished Rabbanim that are here to come up and lead us in Tehillim. First, I'd like to ask my distinguished predecessor, Rabbi Sol Berman, to come forward.
Asher ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzat risha'im u'v'derech hata'im lo amad v'moshav leitzin lo yashar ki v'torat Adonai chefetzo u'v'torato yehegeh yomam v'layla. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Rather, that one's delight is in the Torah of the Lord, meditating in God's Torah day and night. Vayaket shatul al palgei mayim, asher piryo yitem ito, va'aleu lo yibo, v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach. Lo kein harashaim kim kamotz asher tidfenu ruach. Al kein lo yakmu rushaim b'mishpat, v'chateim b'adat tzadikim. Ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim, v'derech rushaim toved.
Now, Rabbi Eli Wiseman, the Rabbi of the Young Israel of Plainview. Just the next one,
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai mi yagur be'aholecha, mi yishkom b'har kodechecha, holech tamim u'foel tzedek v'dover emes b'levavo, lo ragal l'shono, lo asal l're'eu ra'a, v'cherpa lo natzal k'rovo. נבזה בעיניו נמאס ואת ירא אדוני יכבד, נשבע לרע ולא ימיר, כספו לא נתן בנשך, ושוחד הנקי לא לקח, עושה אלה לא ימות לעולם.
And now Rabbi Nathaniel Helfgott, the Rabbi of Netivot Shalom in Teaneck.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, binos deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchosi and aleni, nafshi yishovev, yancheni b'ma'aglei tzedek, lema'an shmo, gam ki elech begeit salmavis lo yirara, ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorai, tishanta b'shem en roshi, kosi revaya, ach tova chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veis Adonai le'orech yamin.
And the final chapter to Tehillim will be read by Rabbi Ari Cement, the Rabbi of Arz Darom in Teaneck.
Shir Lamalo Sesoi Nail Harim Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Me'im Adunayo Se Shamayim Vo'aretz Al Yitain Lamot Raglech Al Yonam Shomrecha Hinei Lo Yonum Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tzilcha, Yad Yaminecha, Yom HaShemesh Lo Yakecha, V'yarech B'layla, Adonai Yishmarcha Michara, Yishmar Snafshecha, Adonai Yishmar Tzeitzcha V'oecha, Me'atah V'yad Olam.
And this morning's eulogies are going to be given by family members. First of all, David, and then Daniel, and then Rachel. So, David.
found it very difficult to organize my thoughts last night for what to say today. And I want to say a few words about the impact my father had on my life, which feels impossible to start and impossible to finish. My father was an engineer, which I am too, and that comes with a certain mindset, which can have pluses and minuses, depending on the situation. For example, if I'm writing some computer code and it's not working, one way would be to think about maybe the reason the code is not working is because the computer is being stubborn, or maybe it will run the code if I just ask it nicer, or maybe I should try to make it feel guilty for not running the code. No, an engineer understands that a computer program or an electronic circuit is just a thing, and if it isn't doing what we expect, it's because there's something we don't sufficiently understand. If the model we have in our head doesn't match the reality, then it's the model that is lacking. My father would sometimes explain to me that in examining a device, one will sometimes see things that don't make sense. Like maybe a wire goes this way, then turns suddenly, then turns back, or there's some piece of circuitry that doesn't look like it's doing anything useful. My father would say that a novice engineer would see that and say, clearly, whoever put that together must have been stupid. I'm taking it out. But a wise engineer understands that whoever put that there had some reason, and if you have no idea what that reason is, then you should be cautious about tinkering with it, because you could be breaking things without even realizing it. And on the flip side, don't mindlessly copy someone's previous design into yours, because if you don't understand what something is for, how do you know if your new design needs one too? My father would frequently cite Minhag avotechem biyadechem, which means the traditions of your ancestors are in your hands. That meant several things at the same time. First, it's literally true. The practices that you do because your parents did them, because their parents did them, etc. It's literally in my hands to do them so that my children will do them, so that my grandchildren will do them, etc. My father was saying that these traditions that we are passing down to you have a long history attached to them. And when you grow up, you will have the responsibility of seeing to it that these traditions will have a long future ahead of them as well. It was also my father's way of saying, like the wise engineer, these traditions have stood the test of time. If each generation does a little tinkering, over time the traditions that persist are the ones that have proven their value over time. You might see some aspects on the surface that don't appear to have any purpose, but like the wise engineer, you have to be very cautious about tinkering with parts that you don't understand what they are for. My father is known for being a good Baal Tefillah. He tried to teach me Nusach as well. The davening that we do is one of those long traditions that we pass down. My father taught me that the purpose of Tefillah is for the effect that it has on the one who is praying. The purpose of Tefillah B'tzibur is for the effect that it has on the one who is praying and on the congregation. Therefore, the words, the proper pronunciation of the words, and the phrasing of the words, and the nusach are all part of a system that might not work the same way if you just change it all around. And also, it will not work if you just perform it mechanically or unthinkingly. My father also taught me that it is important not to lump all traditions together. For example, when davening, it's important to know that when a line is a quote from the Torah or a later composition, it's important to know which parts are fulfilling a mitzvah and which parts are there to assist. Shema Yisrael is not the same thing as Ashrei, and Ashrei is not the same thing as Lecha Dodi. Likewise, in studying Torah, it's important to distinguish what is pshat, the literal meaning of the words, what is drash, derived interpretations of the text, and what is midrash, other stories that aren't found in the text. Each has their purposes, but my father taught me that one is not studying properly if you aren't preserving these distinctions. My father wanted me to be prepared for this moment. And I mean that literally. My father created a folder in Dropbox that he labeled Hesped material and shared it with me about 7 months ago. And into this folder he put some of his work that he was proud of, such as his spreadsheet that he wrote that computes the Jewish calendar. So for example, we know that the first day of Rosh Hashanah can't be on a Sunday or a Wednesday or a Friday. But did you know that of the remaining 4 days of the week, it doesn't fall out equally? The first day of Rosh Hashanah has a 32% chance of being a Thursday, but only 11% chance of being a Tuesday. My father also included 8 Divrei Torah that he had written for the weekly Lincoln Square Synagogue flyer, Dvar Echad Belev Echad. These had been sitting on my computer for a long time, and I noticed a bit eerily last night that they included a Dvar Torah for Parshat Shlach and for Parshat Korach, which are respectively last week's and this week's Parsha. I want to teach you a little bit from what he wrote in those 2 Divrei Torah. The first one is from Parshat Shlach, and it's about the case of the man who was gathering sticks on Shabbos, and Moshe didn't know what to do with him, and so they asked what to do, and the decision was that he should be stoned to death. But there are other examples of person violating the Shabbos and how that was dealt with that don't involve putting anyone to death. At the time, there was a special situation, even the first Shabbos that Bnei Israel was observing in the Midbar. But in Jeremiah, before the destruction of the first temple, there's another case of people who were violating the Shabbat described. It says that people were going to market, not observing the Shabbat, and Yirmiyahu said, he chastised all of them, and he said, what is it that you are doing here? If you continue to violate the Shabbat, bad things will happen. If you keep the Shabbat, that this will be a city of kings with princes sitting on King David's throne, riding in with chariots and horses, and this city of Jerusalem shall be inhabited forever. And if you do not listen to me, and you continue to violate the Shabbat, then different outcome will happen. There will be fire in the gates of Jerusalem, and fire will consume the palaces and will not be quenched. There's another reference to people violating Shabbat in the Nevi'im after the destruction of the first temple and the construction of the second temple. Nehemiah records another instance of Shabbos desecration. And again, there the response is different. It says that he called out to the people and said, who were trying to bring their goods to market on Shabbat, that you should not do this. And he warned them, if you come in here, I will physically try to stop you. And if you and do not come here anymore. And they did not come in. But what's different about those situations is that the approach taken is that we don't ever punish people like they did in that case of the person gathering the sticks. As my father wrote, he describes a society where religious observance is not coerced, but is preached by religious leaders to the people and restricted by government rules. The benefits of the observed law are emphasized, and the punishments are the long-term consequences of sin. In the Dvar Torah about Korach, talks about, of course, we have Korach, who was rebelling against the rulership of Moshe and of the Kohanim, and it talks about after the incident of Korach that it tells the Leviim of their obligation that even though they are going to be collecting Maaser, that they are nevertheless, even though they are going to be donated food, they must themselves take a portion of the food that they have been donated and donate it themselves. And it says, when the tatem imenu et trumat Hashem la'Aaron HaKohen, that you will give this gift of the food to Aaron the Kohen. And it says Aaron specifically and does not mention the priests of the time. And so the question that is asked on this is, what does it mean that people who are going to be living in the land of Israel after Aaron has died, that they are to literally give the food to Aaron? Another example of the same question is when Hashem is speaking to Moshe. He says about your forefathers Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that I did keep my covenant with them to give them the land of Eretz Canaan. So the question is, why does it say to give them the land of Eretz Canaan when they have already passed away? It's really should have said to give it to your descendants. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin quotes these two texts and uses it as a proof that what the concept of Tchiyat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead, and says it clearly must mean that this will literally be true, that Aaron HaKohen will someday be alive, and he will be receiving Truma as a literal reunification of the soul and the body. Likewise, for Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they will literally someday have inherited the land of Israel. But the Rav, in his posthumously edited and published book, The Emergence of Ethical Man, cites this Gemara and learns something different from it. He says that these unique passages single out a founder, Aaron or Avraham, for the identification with the group that will come from them. So I quote here, "Whatever is realized in the course of historical occurrence is to be understood as a personal attainment of the founder." And that this concept of resurrection of the dead, in this view, isn't focusing on literal resurrection of the dead, but perhaps these passages are not meaning that. It's not a citation for literal resurrection of the dead, but that the outcome that comes from a person's actions is attributed to the person who started it and who founded it, as much as it is to the people who actually do it. A last Dvar Torah that my father sent to me was published in February, and it was about the Shabbos Zachor, the mitzvah to remember what Amalek did in the desert, and also not to forget. And what he wrote here is, as I approach or reach the time of my own mortality, I'm paying attention to the topic of Olam Haba. The phrase has a deep ambiguity, reflecting the trends of our heritage that embrace both mysticism and rationality. We know that the structure of memory is embedded in as yet undiscovered processes and parts of the mind that connect our essence with reality. We know that the physical structure of the mind is lost when our life ends. What we have learned about the mind system is vastly dominated by what we do not know. So Olam Haba is referring to the world to come, and we don't know exactly what that means. We know that it has been interpreted variously in different ways, and one interpretation that my father adds at the end of this Dvar Torah is the Olam Haba, literally the world to come, could be referring to simply the world that will exist after we have left it. And this view is not to negate the other views, but just also a reference to what Olam Haba means. He says, the quality of the world that we leave is a part of the heritage of our existence. Our past good and bad actions have had effects on the world that we leave. In this spirit, I'm honored to speak about the good impact that my father has had and how we will remember him. Another phrase that people say about Olam Haba is that he has gone to a better place. While it's true that he is in a better place, those of us who are now here, left without him, are not.
Today is Rosh Chodesh. There's so much that we can learn from the way my father lived his life. My father worked in the field of technology before there was a field of technology. Or, as a family friend of ours posted, he was a technophile way before it was cool. He was an expert in analog to digital conversion, that bridge between the inexact world and digital precision, which he approached with great creativity. He was one of the founders of the company that he worked at for most of his career, LTX, and he was featured in one of their ads. And the tagline they used, it said, 4 years later, Solomon Max's codec testing ideas aren't so strange. It was at this beautiful intersection that they would always be contemplating things. He had a particular interest in the Jewish calendar, and the misalignments that the Jewish calendar sometimes had with the astronomical phenomena or the way it happens. He would plot the solar date of Rosh Hashanah as it moved through the years. He would show the distribution of holidays on particular days of the week. And he would work out why it's so difficult for Thanksgiving and Hanukkah to coincide. And I remember that he explained to me that despite the fact that in shul each month they announce exactly, the molad will occur at this and this time, and 3 chalakim in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. He says, actually, it doesn't work out that it's not really in Yerushalayim, it's shifting, and he would calculate where it would be at a particular time of year as it drifted out over different parts of the world. My father was an active attendee at shul. He went to Medinet Shul, and he was always early. He was sure to be on time. And the exact time was important to him, and at the time that it was on his watch. And I remember that he had, he took his quartz watch, and I guess it wasn't precise enough, so he brought it into work, and I don't know what you do, but he brought it with a cesium laser and calibrated it so that it would be more exacting and keep time without losing it. And as time passed, I guess he switched to a watch that just automatically synchronized with an atomic clock. So we always had the right time, and he would say, now they're late. Now it's time. And he was also chazan, often for the tefillot of Geshem, Tal, for the Yamim Noraim. And I remember that in his machzor for Yom Kippur, for Ne'ilah, he had carefully marked down at different spots the countdown of how far there was to go, so that everything would pace exactly, so that he would hit that final shofar blast at exactly the right time. I was thinking, growing up, my father prepared a lot of food, and he had special recipes that he would often have for different parts of the year. Whether it was on Shavuot, it was either the milk soup or Stefania, and he had the baking of challah, and he'd do all these things. But I think, as much as it was all the food, this was always the enthusiasm that he had for approaching holidays. He would prepare. Each holiday had its tremendous amounts of preparation that he would do. And I remember for Pesach, turn over upside down, and he would, grate the maror and prepare prepare the charoset by hand. But elaborate on that, and I know that that continued on, and I know that my children had some opportunities to cook with him also, to bake with him. It was something that was very special. My father had a great love for the land and the people of Israel, which he instilled in us. His two sisters lived there. His parents had moved there. And when I'd been growing up, he made sure that we made regular visits to stay both in touch with our family there and with the land. And later they purchased their apartment there, where they spent portions of the year, mainly around the Chagim. And I'm deeply grateful that he was able to share this love for Israel with my oldest daughter, Rena, when he accompanied her there and my mother-in-law for her bat mitzvah trip to Israel. He drove them all across the land to see family, to experience the land. And I remember it was one of the places that they went to, and took my daughter Rena, and they went to the dig for a day. And I guess there was a part where you had to crawl into these tight, small tunnels. And my dad followed right in with her, climbed right in. And when he emerged, everyone was impressed with his 80-year-old youthfulness. As he remarked, I'm 80 years old. Well, now he's going to be making his final journey back to Israel. And he's going to be returning home. We're going to miss him very much.
I am honored that I was given the privilege of speaking about my amazing Saba. He was always ready to help us whenever we needed it. I remember how my little brother and I would call for help with our parsha, and no matter what he was doing, he would drop to help us. Between the two of us, it could take an hour to finish, but he never said that he was too busy to help. When I was younger, we used to bake challah together. He would say, "Let's make challah," and we'd make challah together, or at least that's what I thought. In reality, he was making the challah, and I was doing nothing. He made me feel like I was helping, even though I was really only slowing the process down. My mother had told me that when her father had died, he made sure that she always had someone with her. Everything that we are taught in school about good meat he personified. He was always willing to give up his own time. He was always welcoming, helping us when we were sick or in need, and he always did it with a smile and was happy to do it from the bottom of his heart. Thinking back, I know that I was very lucky to have the time with him. He was able to come to all of our bat mitzvahs because if the dates had been a little different, he would have been too sick to come. My Saba left a strong legacy in a family of great integrity. He taught us what it means to be a great person. My siblings, cousins, and the rest of my family both follow in his footsteps, and we have big shoes to fill. Even though he was sick and dying, he thought of everyone else, which we should all take away the fact that a family is not about I, but the whole family. He was always ready to run to do a mitzvah, and now we should all run to do a mitzvah in his honor.
Now I would like to ask Rabbi Moshe Sokolov to come and say a few words.
אחד מפני החבורה שמת תדאג כל החבורה כולה. When even a single member of a fellowship passes away, it's a matter of concern to the entire fellowship. Saul was a part of a particular fellowship that we have at Lincoln Square Synagogue, the Fellowship of the Early Risers, the daily early minyan, the early minyan on Shabbat, and he was always a fixture in the shiur that I have the privilege to give after the early minyan. Without time to prepare a formal hesped, I thought that I would allow Rambam to speak on my behalf, knowing that that was something that he would certainly appreciate and accept. Mishnah Avot tells us, Knei lecha chaver, acquire a chaver for yourself. A chaver, a friend, a fellow, a comrade, literally it means a link. And having a chaver means being linked to something. Saul for us was a link. He was a link to many in the Chavurah, to an other generation. He was a link to Austin, to the tradition of the Soloveitchik family in which he shared and participated. And he was, of course, as was mentioned, a link also to the traditions of Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Torat Yisrael. And the question that Rambam asks on the Mishnah is, why does it say Knei lecha chaver instead of saying Aseh lecha chaver or saying Hitchaber la'acherim? Either make a friend for yourself or just simply attach yourself to others. And he says, HaKavanah bazeh, that the reason that the Mishnah chose the language of Knei lecha chaver is tzarich la'adam sheyikneh ohev la'atzmo. That it's very important for a person to acquire somebody whom he likes. Sheyitaknu vo ma'asav v'chol inyanav. So that with the assistance of this other person, he can be reflective and he can improve himself and enhance himself. And Rambam goes on in this regard to quote yet somebody else for whom I know Saul had a tremendous amount of respect, as somebody who was also an engineer, a man of science, a philosopher, deeply committed to ethics, and that's Aristotle. And Aristotle is quoted as saying, Ha'ahuv acher hu, that while it may appear that somebody to whom you attach yourself, that a friend, is another, he is apart from yourself, in reality, he continues and he says, Mishnen nafshechahu. Really having a friend, having a chaver, is essentially having an alter ego, having somebody who is another of yourself. And the Midrash says, Yikneh Adam chaver la'atzmo. What is the purpose, the practical purpose of having a chaver? Liyot korei imo v'shoneh imo. Somebody with whom you daven, somebody with whom you learn. V'ochel imo v'shoteh imo. But it's not just somebody with whom you share the religious moments or the ritual moments of your life. It's someone with whom you share even the mundane parts of your life and your existence. And indeed, the number of times that we were able to have the company of Saul, of Meira, at Kiddush or at special occasions in these minyanim, are also something that we will now miss his company. And finally, the Midrash says, Vigolelo sitarav, that a friend, an ohev, is somebody to whom you can reveal, not starim in the sense of mysticism or esotericism, but somebody with whom you are prepared to really bare your soul, as it were. Somebody with whom you're prepared to reveal even your innermost feelings, your fears, your anxieties. And I just want to take this one, perhaps homiletical step further. One of the terms that's used in Talmudic Midrashic literature for burial is stira, hiddenness. Remember that in the days of the Mishnah and partially in the days of the Gemara, they didn't bury people directly. The burial was only temporary, and then the bones were collected and were stored in an ossuary. And in fact, if we were to restore the practice today, and I recall musing about this once with Saul, it would give us many more opportunities to skip Tachnun, because Yom Likod Atzamot, the day on which the bones were collected and placed in an ossuary, is regarded by Chazal as a day of celebration. And it's actually, in a sense, perhaps fitting or perhaps ironic that Saul now goes to be buried in Eretz HaChayim, in which there are other members of our Chavurah and parents of members of our Chavurah, including my own, who are already buried, and I'm sure that they await this opportunity to welcome him into the new Chavurah.
Friends, we've heard extraordinarily moving, full praises, reminiscences an extraordinarily unique individual, a man who was able to balance in his life, in shul and in family, a love, as we heard, for tremendous precision and accuracy, rationality, an extraordinary devotion, piety, belief, and adherence to Judaism. In fact, something that Daniel said before, I think actually David said before, about how his professional life was based around the idea of translating the analog to the digital, struck a chord of an individual who spent his life not just living contradiction, but just living two separate lives, but who spent his life living and melding and translating between the scientific, the rational, the measurable, the precise, and the spiritual, the love of tradition, the devotion, the regularity of davening, and words of Torah. An extraordinary life led with such devotion and precision. And I want to reflect just for 1 second. I was so pleased that Daniel mentioned the beautiful Divrei Torah that Saul shared in our Shabbat newsletter with the community so many times. And I also, Father did not leave for me a Dropbox for Hespedim. But my mind also returns to that very moving Dvar Torah that he wrote for his late father's Yortzeit last year, right before Parshat Zachor, where, as you said so movingly, he meditated on his own mortality, and he wrote about Olam Haba. And I want to quote just the one sentence after that you quoted, because he writes about Olam Haba. On the one hand, we know that when a person passes away, whatever the human mind contains, by definition, ceases to be. And yet we have an unshakable belief. There's the analog and the digital. There's the rational and the spiritual. We have an unshakable belief in Olam Haba, both the Talmudic concept of a place to which you will go, Olam Haba, a place where tzaddikim yoshvin v'atrotehen b'roshehem v'nenem ziva shechina. They anticipated a place of spiritual bliss, of basking in the divine presence. And also, he said, the literal sense of Olam Haba can be translated as the world that will exist after we have left it. This view of the concept is not in conflict with the Talmudic text, which seems to describe a surreal experience. Surely our existence in the world leaves memories, descendants, and knowledge that were not in existence before our presence on this earth. The quality of the world that we leave is a part of the heritage of our existence. Our past good and actions have had an effect on the world that we leave. And as I contemplate this beautiful family that have lost a father, husband, and grandfather, and I reflect on, as we've heard before, communities that have lost Echad Min HaChabura, one of the most distinguished, exemplary, devout members of the Chabura, regular, devoted, precise, and pious. We are indeed bereft, and we're also enriched. We're also inspired by the knowledge of what it can be to live a good life, to live a life of realism and devotion, and to leave this world a better place. And I want to add one word, because even in this Devar Torah that Saul Olav Shalom wrote, it was very clear that he was extremely realistic about his illness. On a Monday, when I paid a visit in the hospital, and it became very, very clear. The doctors had indicated that the end indeed was approaching. Conversations were happening around the bed, and I thought to myself, one second, very often patients aren't ready to have these conversations. I know this from experience. And I turned to Sol and I said, Sol, what's your understanding of your condition? And he said, I wish the outcome would have been different, but this is Hashem's will, and I accept it. And I can say that his passing from this world was peaceful, was surrounded by words of prayer, and shows the mark of an individual who truly lives a rational, realistic existence, and how that means when lived in the way that Sol lived it. That means inevitably a soul ready to meet his Maker and to claim his eternal reward for a life well lived. Yeh Zichro Baruch. May his memory bless us and continue to bless us as long as we remember him. Amen. We do not, because it's Rosh Chodesh, recite the Kel Mali Rachamim prayer. We're going to conclude with one final psalm, at which point we will escort the Aaron outside to the street so we can do Levayat Hamet in front of the building, and then the family will return to the home. Kavura will take place tomorrow. Do you have an idea roughly the time of the Kavura? Kavura will take place tomorrow at the Eretz Chaim Cemetery in Bet Shemesh, but Shiva will begin this afternoon at the family home, 400 West End Avenue, apartment 9. Sorry? 7, apartment 70. I'm going to recite Michtam LeDavid in order to conclude the service. Michtam LeDavid, Shamreini El ki chasiti vach, Amar l'Adonai Adonai ata, Tovati balalecha, Ligdoshim asher ba'aretz heima, Vadirei kochev sivam, Yirbu atzavotam acher maharu, Balasich nitzkehem midam, Uvalesat shemotam al sefatai. Adonai menad chalki v'chosi, Ata tomich gorali, Chavalim neflili banimim, Af nachlot shafar alai. Avarech et Adonai asher yatzani, Af leilot yisuruni cheliotai. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, Ki mimini balemot. Lachen samach libi v'yagel kevodi, Af besari yishkon lavetach. Ki lo tazov nafshi lishol, Lo titen chasidcha lerot shachad. Todieni orach chaim, Savos samachot et panecha, Ne'imot b'imincha netzach. We're going to accompany the Aaron outside now. I'm going to ask the family members, the children, the Rabbonim, to help escort into the elevator, and we will do a Levayat Hamed in front of the building. Mincha Ma'ariv will take place this evening, and every evening of the Shiva at 8:15, and Shachris tomorrow morning through Wednesday morning is at 7:30, with the exception of Sunday, which is at 8:30 a.m. And if anybody is interested in helping make a meal for the mourners, a meal train has been set up, and please speak to me afterwards.
Folks, we'd ask you to please follow the family down to the main level of the building and outside, please.